All right, let's go. Number 8. The Italian Arditi. In the flooded trenches along the Isonzo River in 1917, the Italian army was dying by inches. 11 separate battles had been fought along that same stretch of front. The 12th was coming. An Italian high command finally admitted that sending ordinary infantry forward again would accomplish nothing except fill more graves. The solution they settled on was radical. Instead of building better defenses or finding ways to hold ground, they decided to create soldiers whose entire purpose was attack. Pure, relentless, forward-driving assault. The unit they built was called the Arditi, which translates directly as the Daring Ones, and the name was not an accident. What made the Arditi ferocious was their doctrine. They carried daggers, grenades, and flamethrowers. Rifles were considered secondary weapons, almost an afterthought. They were trained not to capture enemy positions, but to bypass them entirely, driving straight for command posts and artillery batteries, cutting the head off the defense before the body knew it was dead. It was savage, audacious, and it worked. The broader military world was watching. German commanders documented the Arditi's infiltration tactics in detail, and within a year, those same principles had been absorbed into the German stormtrooper program. British, French, and American planners did the same. The tactical fingerprint of those Italian assault troops spread across every army that fought in the following war, reappearing in commandos, paratroopers, rangers, and shock battalions from Normandy to the Pacific. Every unit on this list is, in some sense, the Arditi's descendant. They invented the idea. The question is whether any of their successors fully understood what they had created. Number 7. The U.S. 509th Parachute Infantry Battalion. On the night of November 8, 1942, 556 American paratroopers boarded aircraft in England and flew south toward North Africa. They had never made a combat jump before. Neither had any other American soldier. The flight covered approximately 1,500 miles, the longest combat airborne operation attempted to that point in the war, and when they finally reached their drop zones over Algeria, almost nothing went according to plan. The 509th Parachute Infantry Battalion was writing the American Airborne Rulebook in real time, under live fire, with no margin for error. They were scattered across the Algerian countryside in darkness, reorganized under fire, and still managed to seize their objectives. It was the kind of improvised, relentless forward momentum that would define the unit across 3 more years of war. What followed was a combat record that moved across 4 theaters: North Africa, Sicily, Italy, southern France. At Anzio, beginning in January 1944, the 509th held a defensive perimeter against repeated German counterattacks for 4 grinding months. They were surrounded, undersupplied, and outnumbered. They held anyway. German units in the Anzio sector began referring to them in after-action reports, with a particular kind of professional wariness that soldiers reserve for opponents who have demonstrated they will not break regardless of what is thrown at them. The battalion was awarded the Presidential Unit Citation, the highest collective honor available to an American military unit. But the commendation documents matter less than what the unit proved in practice: that a small, isolated group of hardened paratroopers, cut off and outgunned, could be more dangerous than formations 3 times their size, because they had long since stopped calculating whether the situation was survivable. They jumped without a net, in every sense of the phrase, and somehow landed running. Number 6. British Number 3 Commando. In the early hours of August 19, 1942, a flotilla of small boats carrying men of Number 3 Commando was moving through the darkness toward the French coast near Dieppe. Their mission was to destroy the Goebbels Battery, a coastal artillery position that would otherwise tear apart the main landing force. Then, at approximately 3:47 in the morning, a German convoy appeared out of the darkness and sailed directly into them. The element of surprise was gone. the mission was compromised. The logical decision, the militarily defensible decision, was to abort. Instead, 18 men from No. 3 Commando made it to shore and attacked the battery regardless. 18 men against a fortified coastal position with no support, no element of surprise, and no realistic prospect of success. They attacked anyway. Number B. 3 Commando had been formed in June 1940 on the direct orders of Winston Churchill, who wanted units capable of striking the occupied European coast and causing, in his words, a reign of terror. The unit's commanding officer, Lieutenant Colonel John Durnford Slater, was one of the architects of British commando doctrine and trained his men at Achnacarry in the Scottish Highlands under conditions deliberately designed to be more dangerous than anything they would face in combat. Trainees died during exercises. That was considered acceptable. German defensive planners at Dieppe took particular note of the commando assault methods in their post-battle analysis and began issuing revised protocols for coastal garrison units specifically in response to what they had observed. A unit of 18 men had forced a structural change in how an entire occupied coastline would be defended. When your enemy begins redesigning his fortifications specifically because of you, that is a particular kind of military compliment, and No. 3 Commando received it in the hardest possible way. Number 5. The Polish 1st Armored Division. By the summer of 1942, when the Polish 1st Armored Division was being formed in Scotland under Major General Stanisław Maciek, Poland had not existed as a sovereign nation for 3 years. The men filling the ranks had crossed half of Europe to get there. They had watched their country occupied, partitioned, and erased from the map. They had nothing left to lose, and in war, that is a devastating state of mind. Most armies fight to hold something: ground, objectives, honor, the safety of the men beside them. The Poles of the 1st Armored fought with a quality that was harder to define and harder still to counter. They had already lost the thing they were fighting for. That left them free to be completely merciless. The division reached France in July 1944, and by August was at the center of one of the most significant operations on the Western Front. At the Battle of the Falaise Pocket, Maciek's division seized Hill 262, a position the Poles themselves named Mekzuga, meaning the mace, and held it against repeated German breakout attempts, while surrounded and cut off. Their position sealed the gap through which approximately 100,000 German troops were attempting to escape encirclement. British and American commanders on both flanks described the Polish resistance at Mekzuga as the hinge on which the entire Falaise operation turned. German commanders in Normandy documented a specific preference among their unit commanders to avoid being placed opposite Polish formations. They would request, through official channels, that their regiment face British or American opposition instead. The Poles, they had concluded, did not observe the informal courtesies that sometimes existed between Western opponents. When you take everything from a man, you remove the only thing that was ever slowing him down. Number 4. The SS Dirlewanger Brigade. Most military units are feared by their enemies. The Dirlewanger Brigade was feared by nearly everyone, including the SS officers assigned to work alongside it, and the German army commanders who requested, repeatedly and urgently, that it be deployed somewhere far from their own positions. In the brutal taxonomy of the Second World War, this unit occupied a category almost entirely its own. The brigade was formed in 1940 by Oskar Dirlewanger, a convicted felon who had served time in German prison before obtaining SS patronage. His initial recruits were drawn from men convicted of poaching offenses, then expanded to include released criminals, psychiatric patients, and soldiers from military prisons facing execution. The logic was that men with nothing left to lose would fight without restraint. The assessment proved correct, though not quite in the way its architects imagined. In Warsaw, during the uprising of August 1944, the Dirlewanger Brigade was deployed into the city. What followed in the Wola district between August 5th and 12th was documented at the Nuremberg Tribunal. Approximately 40,000 civilians killed in those 7 days, the largest single massacre of the war's Western theaters. The unit did not distinguish between combatants and non-combatants. It did not attempt to. Dirlewanger himself was court-martialed twice by SS authorities during the war, not for atrocities, but for failing to maintain basic military discipline within his own formation. By 1945, when the brigade was deployed against Soviet forces, Red Army unit commanders filed reports noting that Dirlewanger's soldiers did not conform to any predictable pattern of military behavior, which made them harder to engage using standard tactical doctrine. There is a difference between being feared for what you are capable of and being feared for what you are willing to do. The Dirlewanger Brigade had erased that line so completely that no one, on any side, could find it anymore. Number 3. The Soviet Guards Shock Armies. In November 1942, outside Stalingrad, German soldiers who had successfully fought across France, across the Balkans, and deep into the Soviet Union began doing something their officers had not seen before and did not know how to stop. When they identified certain Soviet formations moving into position opposite them, some units surrendered before the attack came. They had looked at the unit designations on captured orders and made their decision. Not after contact. Before it. The Guards designation had been introduced by Stalin's directive in September 1941 and was awarded only to formations that had demonstrated exceptional performance in combat. It was not a rank. It was a reputation, formally institutionalized, stitched onto a sleeve, and visible across a battlefield. By 1942, that red-trimmed badge had acquired a meaning that German intelligence analysts tracked with documented concern. The official German military history, Das Deutsche Reich und der Zweite Weltkrieg, records that Guards unit designations on opposing orders of battle produced measurable, statistically observable drops in German defensive morale. During Operation Uranus in November 1942, Guards shock troops encircled the German 6th Army in 4 days, trapping somewhere between 265,000 and 300,000 men in a pocket from which they never escaped. The operation was so sudden, so violent, and so complete that Field Marshal Friedrich Paulus, commanding the 6th Army, reported to Hitler that the encirclement had been accomplished before his units fully understood it was happening. The Strafbat, penal battalions attached to shock army operations, were sent through minefields first. They were told they could redeem their military records by leading assault waves across ground that had not yet been cleared. Many did exactly that. When your enemy's intelligence service begins monitoring your unit insignia as a morale indicator, you have ceased to be merely a military formation and become something closer to a psychological weapon. Number 2. The Gurkhas. In the winter of 1944, during the grinding, attritional struggle for Monte Cassino, a German officer submitted a formal written request to his divisional commander. It was not a request for reinforcements, or ammunition, or air support. It was a request to be redeployed. He did not want his regiment stationed opposite the Gurkhas. The request was granted. This was not unusual. By that point in the war, it had become something that required its own administrative category. The Gurkha regiments had been part of the British Army since 1815, recruited from the hill communities of Nepal, and by 1944, they were fighting on 3 separate continents simultaneously. In North Africa, in Italy, and in the jungles of Burma, they were accumulating a reputation that was remarkable not for being consistent across one theater, but for being independently arrived at by completely separate enemy forces who had no contact with each other's accounts. In Burma, Japanese Army intelligence reports documented that Gurkha night attacks caused unit cohesion failures in Japanese formations that had withstood conventional frontal assaults without breaking. The kukri, the distinctive curved blade carried by every Gurkha soldier, was rarely the cause of those failures. The knowledge that it existed, that the men moving silently through the jungle darkness carried it and knew how to use it, was frequently enough on its own. General William Slim, commanding the 14th Army in Burma, and not a man given to exaggeration, wrote in his memoir, Defeat into Victory, that the Gurkhas' natural environment was the fight itself. The Gurkhas were awarded 26 Victoria Crosses across their service history, and in WWII, their combat records spanned more theaters than virtually any other single unit in the Allied order of battle. German soldiers in Italy and Japanese soldiers in Burma reached the same conclusion about the same men, independently from direct experience. That kind of convergence across two separate wars and two separate cultures is not reputation. It is evidence. Number 1. The Japanese Special Naval Landing Forces. On the morning of December 10th, 1941, 3 days after Pearl Harbor, Japanese Special Naval Landing Force units came ashore at Guam. The island's garrison of 153 American Marines and 308 Guamanian naval militia held for approximately 20 minutes of actual combat before being overwhelmed. The SNLF had rehearsed the operation. They had rehearsed all of them. The Special Naval Landing Forces were Japan's elite amphibious assault troops, the closest equivalent the Imperial Japanese military had to Marines, though that comparison undersells what they were. Selected from the top percentile of naval recruits, trained at the Kuri and Sasebo naval bases under a program designed to produce soldiers capable of independent action under extreme conditions, they became the tip of the Imperial spear across the entire Pacific theater. Shanghai, 1932, Tarawa, Wake Island, the Philippines. Wherever the initial assault was most critical and most dangerous, the SNLF went first. What made them uniquely terrifying to Allied forces in the early Pacific War was a combination of factors that no single element can fully explain. Their physical conditioning was extraordinary. Their willingness to continue attacking under losses that would have halted any conventional formation was documented repeatedly in Allied after-action reports. At Wake Island in December 1941, the first SNLF landing was repulsed by a Marine garrison of 449 men, and the SNLF simply came back 2 weeks later with more men and tried again. American commanders began specifically briefing incoming Pacific units on SNLF tactics, identifying them by their distinctive anchor and chrysanthemum insignia, and warning that standard assumptions about when an attack would stop did not apply. Australian troops at Milne Bay in August 1942 became the first Allied ground force to defeat an SNLF landing in the Pacific, and the significance of that achievement was understood immediately by every Allied commander in the theater. It was not just a tactical victory. It was proof that something most soldiers had privately doubted, that these men could, in fact, be stopped. The Special Naval Landing Forces did not surrender on sight, and they did not expect anyone else to either. They had been built, deliberately and methodically, to be the last thing a defending force wanted to see coming across the water. In the darkest months of the Pacific War, when the question of whether Allied forces could hold anywhere was genuinely unresolved, they were the proof that the question was worth asking. If you want to see more videos like this, click the video on screen now and make sure to subscribe.